Have you seen this guy all over the pickleball space, all over YouTube, and recently in all of the Vuori ads? Well, he's this guy for Building Pickleball, and he has interviews with all of the top players in pickleball and the founder and so much more. Believe it or not, we just had him on the podcast.
Theme of why I started this whole thing. So I have this note and it just says fears, and you're given two decisions or like two options when someone passes, or like when a significant moment happens in your life, and you can either let it drag you down one direction that you'll look back on and be like, damn, that was not the direction, that was not the right direction for me, or you can let it pull you towards the other direction and let it kind of sit behind you and guide you forward. So when my dad died in 2015, that's when I like had that wake up call, and that's just always stayed with me.
Don't think we're going to get through all the material that I want to talk about, but I'm sure we'll have you back on for an episode 2 at some point. So for those who may not actually know what Building Pickleball is, can you tell us about like what it is today?
Yeah. No, thank you for the opportunity. So as far as like what Building Pickleball is today is, I'm a content creator in the space of pickleball that's leveraging social media to build up brands, athletes, and players in the space.
Okay. So what really made you say, like, let's document pickleball? Like what, because you could go so many avenues with that, right? And there's a lot of the untold stories on Netflix. There's a lot of other docu-series out there. What made you, stumble upon pickleball and say, let me see if I can actually document this from start to finish?
Yeah, I mean, just like any project or like any business or anything that's been started, what it started as isn't really what it is today, and I
Mm.
don't think I could have seen what it is today. Um, it honestly just started as the podcast. So this started in early 2023. I've been interested and playing pickleball since 2020. That's when I started. And then I was like playing for 2 years, and then like early 2023 is when I got started with the podcast. I was just curious about founders in the space. No one was really sharing the stories, or if they were, I just didn't think it was in a way that I thought that a way that like satisfied my curiosity.
Mm.
So I started the podcast and kind of started like answering some of those questions. But I also think it was like subconsciously my way of trying to figure out how to navigate entrepreneurship, because they
Mm.
kind of happen parallel, right? It was like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
starting the podcast, I'm going to start this path of entrepreneurship. And I didn't know what it really entailed. And I was like, how could I think subconsciously I was asking myself, like, how could I find help in the exact space that I'm in and feel somewhat like seen or heard and be able to relate to people? And that's what the podcast started off as, right?
So that's a super unique approach that, I mean, any entrepreneur can learn from. Is you basically said, if I'm going to start this, how can I leverage people that have already learned something about, let's say, it's business in general? How can I document or even just have conversations, have an excuse to have conversations with them and kind of learn from them along the way, and then build this business as a whole that started off as a podcast from there? I love that. And I think what's so cool about that people forget is, by just having a conversation, you learn so much, right? And even if it's takes, a couple hours, there are one or two things on there that you may carry for the next 20 years. So we use this analogy often, and anybody that has watched the past couple episodes will literally be like, "Oh my God, you're talking about it again." But I like to reiterate it. It's the fact of, there's a hallway of life, right? And you have all these doors along this hallway. And if you never open a door, you never really know what opportunity is on the other side, right? And if you go through that door and you have that conversation, you're like, I don't get anything from this. Like, you could always close that door behind you. There's nothing wrong with closing it. But if you ever open it and you kind of just sit in the space of the unknown, you never know where you're going to go and what you're going to be. And I think that's what you just said is like, you didn't know it was going to get to this where you are today. And we'll get into some of the cool stuff that you've done as well, even leading up to this. But you just kind of like taking action and taking initiative, like brought you into this super cool position you are today. So I admire that heavily. I really do. You've done such a tremendous job documenting it. But I wanted to ask you about on the journey from when you started till now, there had to have been a lot of struggles, a lot of them. So, like, especially being a creator, right? Because a lot of people think that it's an ideal route to take, and there is so much opportunity in being creator, but it's also very tough. So, can you like talk to us about like some of the struggles that you've gone through or had to navigate over this period of time from when you started to where you are now?
Oh man, that's a good question. I have
Yeah.
this Apple Note that says, let's see, where are they? I think, yeah, like, okay, so I have this massive note.
Yeah.
It's
Share it with
just
us.
started. Yeah, yeah. It started as like I guess the reason why I started this whole thing is because I wanted to like I was getting the sorry, my thoughts are kind of like all over the place right now.
You're good.
Um so I was on my way to Sedona. I've like flown into Phoenix and was on my way to Sedona and I get a call from one of my coworkers. I was a UX designer for Walmart Global Tech at the time. And my coworker asked, like, "Hey, are you in the meeting right now?" I was like, "No, like on my way to Sedona. What's up?" He's like, "Do you want the good news or the bad news first?" This was early 2023,
Okay.
and 2022 is probably when like layoffs really started coming through. I mean, you could say that during COVID, the 2020s when they really started, but this is when they really started like laying in on the layoffs. Um, and I was like, "Yeah, just shoot it to me straight." He's like, so you have two options. You can either move to Bentonville, Arkansas, or you can take the severance. And I was like, this answer's obvious. Like I already had this inkling in my mind that I some things are never really enough for me, and it I actually don't know if that's like a good thing or a bad thing. I guess I just have to figure out the balance in my life, but I'm just
Mm.
never satisfied. And it's like, I can go into another tangent about why it's not good for you. But in this moment, for this particular reason, I was like, I know that the corporate world is just not for me. So I decided, like, okay, if I do this thing of entrepreneurship, who would it force me to become? And that is the main, like, theme of why I started this whole thing. Because if it's for pickleball, I think that's kind of a short term view. It's pretty
Yeah.
myopic. It's not the biggest reason, but if you frame it as who would this force you to become, then you end up on this journey and this like very like long term kind of like view of how to take this whole thing. So, anyways, because of that, I'm always like looking at this not from like always business or like a creative perspective, but I look at it as like a life and a personal journey perspective. So I have this note, and it just says fears, and these are
Hmm.
just like the things that you'll think about and when you're along this journey. And I wanted to write it down because like I wanted to one like document what are these actual fears that I have, and two, what does the journey look like to overcome these obstacles. So like one of them is like I can't monetize it, and then through time I learned that that this isn't really true. And so like underneath it, it says I'm a freelancer. I have the opportunity to make. I mean, honestly, like the sky is the ceiling. Um, so it's like what happens to the channel by next year? I can't pay my mortgage right now. Like that, this severance money will only last me like less than a year.
Mm.
I money from this that I'll have to go back to a regular 9 to 5. I'll work for someone again. I'll never get to like 100,000 followers, and there's just like all these like ideas and like all these like initial hesitations. But like, why would people listen to me? Like, why would they listen to you? And it's like, who really cares about the podcast. So it's just like all these initial things. So I guess, yeah, when I go to answer your question, like initial obstacles, I think as a content creator, building an audience is probably one of the biggest challenges, because if you can't build an audience, then you don't really have then you don't have a product, because you are your product, essentially, or whatever you're creating is your product. So if you can't build an audience, then you've failed. That's like your biggest tell if whether or not you can do it. I think like hesitations of doing it alone. Like, I don't know if you do this alone, if you have any hires, but like I edit everything, I film everything. Um,
So
yeah,
I have one person that I'm very grateful for who does a lot of the things behind the scenes for me. Um, but what I want to comment on is I think that the way you went about that is something to take away not only in entrepreneurship but pickleball, any athletic sport, any part of life, is that you literally wrote down your fears and drove straight into them, right? And so many people hesitate to take that leap, right? Because of like that fear of failure, or let's say it's fear of judgment, fear of expectation, just holds them back. And I think even myself, right? If I'm relating kind of recently on like my pickleball journey, or even with the Fail First podcast, there was so much hesitation even in my play because I have been working so hard to do this, and now it's time to perform, and you have fear that somebody's going to judge you and say, "You know what? They're not that good, or they're not working that hard, or they're not going to get there." Right? And those thoughts do run through your brain, but ultimately when you reflect on life and you're like, "Why am I doing this?" It is not about the other people or their judgments or anything like that. It is totally about how do I want to allocate my time, right? And the summary that you gave is absolutely amazing, because you said, regardless of the fears, here's what I want to do with my life. Here's the person that I possibly want to become. So I need to do this anyways. And I need to figure it out anyways, which is amazing. Absolutely amazing. I want to ask you a few parts of that, because now it's like, what made you take the leap? Because you wrote down all your fears. You're saying these are all the things that holding me back. What got you over that barrier? What told you, let me do this today?
hmm. my my dad died in an accident in 2015. Um, I've like even prior to that, I was kind of like a go-getter to a degree, but I think when he died in 2015, that was like a wake-up call. That is like, you can always take two. You're given two decisions, or like two options when someone passes. Or like when a significant moment happens in your life, and you can either let it drag you down one direction that you know you'll look back on and be like, damn, that was not the direction. That was not the right direction for me. Or you can, like let it pull you towards the other direction, and let it kind of sit behind you and guide you forward. So when my dad died in 2015, that's when I like had that wake up call, and that's just always stayed with me. Of just this side, it sounds very cliche, but it's just like, you only have one life. You just never know when it could go, when you could cease to exist, or when everything could just go to like absolute shit, and like everything you have is gone. Um, so like I was like, okay, like what if I died tomorrow? Like, would I be satisfied with the life I've lived? So far, probably not. But I know back then in 2015, definitely not. Like, it sucks, because I think then I lived with a lot of regret. When my dad died, it was like a wake up call that, man, like the last time you saw me, I wasn't in my like full form. Like, I was not, I guess, like to quote what the kids say these days, like I was not main character. I was
Mm.
just like, I was a fucking like NPC. I was just like nothing. I didn't think like I had reached my full potential, and it sucks for someone's like last memory of you to be that you were just like a shell of yourself, that you never like amounted to anything. So yeah, I guess like I'll always kind of like live with that regret, but it's also like a principle and like a guiding principle in my life of just making sure that you seize like every day and like every opportunity you have. And it doesn't mean you have to go and start a business. It could just mean that you just become a better person at fostering relationships with people, that you just like
Mm.
love people more, that you just don't take things for granted. You don't take life for granted. You don't take opportunities for granted. You don't take the people in your life for granted. Um, and like you just wake up every day and you're like, okay, like I can make something of today. Yeah, I have like days where I don't always like go 100%, have some like off days, but I think mostly it was just like, okay, once my dad died and then I met someone significant in my life who's my Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA coach, Greg Souders. He just like shifted my perspective in life entirely as well. So certain people give you like information in life where you're like, damn, if I don't make some use of this information, then I think like it would be it would be like it would be like a regret in some form to like a great disappointment to that person, and like with the gift that they've given you.
I'll tell you that a one, I appreciate you sharing that tremendously because I think the theme resonates over and over again. It's just like what employs you to have the perspective. And the theme is always at the end of the day, when I'm 85, and Alex Hermosi, who I know that you follow as well, always says this. It's like when you're 85, you're reflecting back on your life. And he does this in a daily practice to kind of have gratitude towards waking up and tackling every day. When you're 85 and you're looking back, are you going to have any regrets that you didn't try this, that you didn't try that? And it's not always about getting there, but it's about saying, one, I allocated my time to the things that I wanted to, and I tried my damn best at the end of the day to get there. And if I could relate to you in any way with the Fail First project, like that's what we're trying to do the same thing, right? It is, my short journey to share with you is, and I know I shared with you briefly, but I was engineering for 5 years, and I got to a point where it's like, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So I tried to figure out like, what else do I want to do and how can I leverage it? And long story short, to get to the Fail First project, where I had regret in my life is I grew up playing hockey, and I came to a point where I knew I had the skill to play at a very high level, even go to a professional level. And once I became aware of that and had those expectations that I set on myself, I crumbled underneath it, right? I had an extreme fear of failure. I had an extreme fear of failure. That was a tough one. And and then all you have all these eyeballs on you, and you feel like you need to meet these expectations, and before you know it, you crumble underneath it, and then you run away from it rather than driving straight into it. So today, like that's what we're trying to employ is you have these tough moments in life that nobody wants, but life has a bunch of highs and lows. And when you navigate them, like you said, you had two decisions. You had the decision to either let it consume you, and what a lot of people talk about is like a victimhood mentality, right? I forgot what book it comes from. I want to say it's the Power of Ted, the Empowerment Dynamic, a really good book. But it's either you can go that route or you could use it as one, fuel, and two, a reason for you to grow into the person that you inevitably want to be and are going to be anyways. So there is so much gold in the story that you just told and your journey up into this point. Um, Moving on, kind of from there, I wanted to kind of question you on something because you spoke about the fact of thinking that always wanting more may be a unhealthy mindset. I'm going to reframe it and give a different perspective and see if you agree with me on it, okay? So how I usually like to ask the question is like, if you're not growing, are you dying? Meaning, is there a middle space? Like, if you aren't moving forward, are you inevitably moving backward because life is going to move forward anyways?
What what does middle space look like?
I never had anybody ask that question. I love that. Um, I don't think there's a middle space, to be honest with you. So I think we believe there's a middle space, but then we'll use pickleball for an example, right? If you are just playing every single day, straight playing, and we'll get into some approaches that you take that I want to get into drilling. But let's say you're just playing, you're not working on certain things, you're not even trying to tactically analyze the game. Well, if everybody else around you is doing that, everybody else is growing while you are staying stagnant. So the only thing that happens is that the gap between where you are and where everything else is gets larger. So therefore you're really moving backwards, because if you're staying stagnant, you are inevitably moving backwards because everything else around you is moving forwards. So rather than there being like a middle ground, I've always thought of it as it's directional, meaning you're moving in one direction or the other. Not saying you got to sprint, right? Some days it's a walk, but I feel like you have to either move forward or you're moving backwards, rather than like it just being a quote unquote unhealthy habit for wanting more. Do you agree with that kind of?
Yeah, I don't know. Like growth is
Okay.
such an interesting thing. Like I've seen um, some athletes, they just have like so many peaks and valleys. So, like you'll see them like lose in competition or like yeah, they'll just have like a really bad streak of losing, and then people
Mm,
always just are immediately are just very quick to judge and criticize them, and then you see that like a few months later they just go on this like non-linear trajectory. Um, so yeah, I guess like it's so hard to tell like what growth looks like. It just I think it looks different for so many people. Some people take a step back and um, they might take a step back or they might like change or like shift how they're training. And that
mm,
initial period, because it is novel, it will produce probably like usually novel results, which a novel person's experience or person's experience to novel things, which is usually like met with newness and like a beginner like kind of like mentality. So you do see that period, but then that period is instrumental to like the long term, like the like grand, the larger picture. But yeah, if you're not growing, you're dying. Yeah, yeah, I guess yeah,
Do
probably makes
you
sense.
have you found that you've had any struggles? The reason I ask this is because I know you're in Austin, and there's definitely many like-minded individuals in that space. Have you found that it has ever been a struggle being like so growth oriented, like relating to people in any way, or do you feel like it's just finding the right people around you that align with your perspectives and mindset?
Dude, 100%. I like talk about this with my coach and some of my friends. This probably isn't going to like sit well with some people, but there are many times where I've felt like I just can't relate to a lot of people. And I think because the masses generally just like when people talk about things like Tiger King or they talk about Real Housewives or they talk about some bullshit that I just don't subscribe to, or I don't know if it's prescribe or subscribe, but it's like that, or they talk about college football or like what's going on. And I always feel alienated, and I sometimes feel like, what is going on? Like, am I like the one going crazy for like just not being in tune with these things? And it goes to the second thing you said, which was just like, you just have to find the right tribe. And I talked to that about that with my coach. My coach is like, no, dude, like when you really listen to some of the bullshit that people talk about, it's fucking crazy. That like people just go through their lives with that. And that's like exactly what I don't want to be. And I think it's hard to say because in Austin there is a really big. This is like I've said it before. This place is like a petri dish, man. Like if you want something to thrive, um, whether it is yourself or an idea, I think Austin is a great place for that. Like run clubs are huge here. Tech had a massive boom. Of course, like Michael Dell was born here. I think it was Michael Dell. Like Hewlett Packard,
Yeah.
one I think also has like an office here. So like tech is really big. Pickleball is now really big. Run clubs. There's just like startups. Startups were also really really big. So people here are like have that go-getter mindset without having the California LA vibe where it's just like, hey, like where was the last place you traveled to? Like what do you do for work?
Mm.
I'm in this run club. I've been in this run club for like 8 weeks now. We see each other once a week. It's like 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Not once is like someone asked me, like, hey, what do you do for work? Or like where have you traveled to? We're just there. We're just all like in support of getting we're all in support of lifting each other up to reach our goals. I think right now it probably is like running for most of the people in that group, but it's just like people who are like super, super supportive. But um, yeah, yeah, I think it's very easy to alienate yourself. And it sucks, right? Because you
Yeah.
have people in your life that aren't that way, and it's cool. Like, it's okay. Not everyone has to be this way. There are people who are very content, and sometimes I can feel envious about like their contentment. But yeah,
Have you had any friends or family close to you that you feel like also were a little resistant to the direction that you started taking?
dude, someone that's like always been super supportive is my older brother, Danny. It's just like
Yeah.
I don't know like what why he always has been, but that guy, he's like kind of he does his own thing. He's not
Hmm.
like super social or like very out there, but man, he's always been like super supportive. Back when I was younger and I was going through this like teen emo phase. I was like a goth kid. I shopped at Hot Topic and stuff. People would be like, "Yo, what's up with your brother?" Because we were like a year and a half apart, so we'd
Yeah.
be in school at the same time. Be like, "Yo, what's up with your brother?" He's like, "Who gives a shit, man? Like he's just doing his thing." So like he's been supportive of like my MMA career, this content creation journey. He's probably the one who like has helped me find inspiration through guys like Casey Neistat. So like he's the one who introduced me to Casey Neistat as far as like his content, not personally.
Yeah.
But um, my dad and my mom probably weren't thrilled in the beginning when I was an MMA fighter. It's funny. My mom watches my YouTube content now, and it's very weird. Um, but like apparently like some of my family members do too. They like subscribe to my YouTube channel, and this is like family members I haven't seen in like a long
Yeah.
time. Very weird to think about. Um, no, I guess like I don't know. It's hard to say. Like Hormozy's talked about it, right?
Yeah.
That you have friends who appear to be supportive of you, but deep down, like they'll do or say things to like keep you from rising higher because that means that if they're here and you're starting off here, you eventually start surpassing them, and they don't
Hmm.
want to. And it's like it's an uncomfortable truth. Like, yeah, it's just reality.
And I think that, like, building off that, I think if more people took the approach of lifting each other up, like even in pickleball, right? I think there is still today a lot of headbutting, right? Competing for space. But there is so much demand that if, same thing in business, when you partner up with somebody that adds value to you rather than trying to either knock them down or run them out of business, you ultimately grow the total addressable market, right? The total population of people that you have available beyond just competing for the same pool, right? And I think the same thing happens in life, even if it's podcasting, right? If it is pickleball, if it is relationships, if you continuously just show, and Hermosi talked about this, right? If you continuously show that you can add some sort of value, it makes it very, very tough for people to say one, no to you, and two, want to work together. And then three, the outcome is that the growth you both had by putting two minds together, or three or four rather than one, is more than you can even predict, right? So I think that's a really, really good lens to have, because there's, and this is why I asked you about the Austin question. There is even like where I am, so I'm in Connecticut today, right? And it's tough to find like-minded individuals in Connecticut specifically, but even like the Northeast, right? So also what you spoke of is like my local friends, right? Even some of the family members, and there's nothing wrong with this before I say it, right? It is mostly the 9 to 5 journey. You're living for the weekends. And the reason I say there's nothing wrong with that is a lot of people find high satisfaction in that path of life, right? And I'm just the person who doesn't find fulfillment from that. And there's also nothing wrong with that. So I've chosen to take a different journey. But the reason I asked you the question is because I'm also in the same space where it is a struggle sometimes to find like-minded people. So yes, I'm definitely considering moving at some point. Maybe it is Austin, maybe it is somewhere else, but I'll have to give you a ring if I do. But
Yeah.
I want to move into some other fun stuff. All right, starting with jujitsu, because I know that you speak highly of your mentor, Greg Saunders. And I watched some of his stuff and I loved it. There's, I did. There's one topic that I do want to get into in totality. But first, I want to ask you if there's one thing that he has told you, because I know you have a personal relationship with him, that carries with you really daily. Is there something that is like a consistent reminder where you're like, he said this stuck with me, and I really carry this every single day?
Um,
The reason I ask that is because I have a mentor of mine coming from engineering, and what kicked me off of one, my personal development journey, and two, driving straight into failure is that he literally just told me after I fucked up big time on a project, and it was from a financial standpoint. They had me run through the ringer, tight deadlines. So I come from aerospace manufacturing, and we shipped out the product without um, really logging all of the transactions. So we had to relog, backtrack everything. So when corporate was looking at it, basically they saw a big error and all fingers got pointed at the project lead, which was Alec, right? So with that being said, everything ended up getting corrected, but he looked at me in a stern tone and said, "Listen, you know that what happened here was a fuck up." However, he looked at me again and then said, "Have no fear, right? Find a way through it." And that was it. So that little moment of him just looking at me in a low time changed me to carry that now through the next 5 years of my life. And so many times where I'm in a low point, I'm just like, have no fear, right? Find a way through it.
yeah. It's actually not so much about what Greg says or said. I have a whole list of things he said. Um, but it's actually more about like what he's done himself. So he just speaks through his actions. You're talking about a guy who's like didn't come up through anything, any like special, like his parents weren't well off by any means. He like grew up in Ireland, was like born and raised there. He like picked up the jujitsu thing. Like this guy was, you could probably say he's like probably lower income, maybe like close to poor when he was like younger. Anyways, like what he ended up doing is like he got into the jiu-jitsu thing, ended up coaching, like started his own gym. This came after like many years, but the gym that I ended up training at was one that this was probably like 8 years after he had started actually like coaching. And it's just what he's built and what he's done. Like when I talked about earlier about how it sometimes feels like we're alienated because we don't keep up with mainstream, like that guy literally all he cares about is producing the best athletes he can and wanting to build like world champions. And that's what he does. His gym was like this tiny garage, just like black walls everywhere, and it's just a small garage. And he had been doing that for 10 years until someone significant like found out what he was doing, and now
Mm.
he has a that he has. But it's a guy who is like completely nerded out on jujitsu and grappling, but not just that, it's like coaching. And he is one of the best coaches in the sport. And it's a guy who just like puts his head down, just does the coaching, studies, and reads like thick, dry books on like all this material. And he's now like finally being recognized as like one of the best coaches and all the hard work that he's done. And when people visit, it feels like something special because it's not commercial, it's not big, it's not fancy. You come to Rockville, Maryland. Like there's nothing going on in Rockville, Maryland, but you end up coming to this gym and you find some of the best work that you can find, and also one of the most like tight knit groups of guys and girls that you could find. Um, like people are searching for that magic, that like quote unquote that magic thing. And when they come to standard, not saying that standard has the magic, but you are finding something very close. You're not even you don't even find the magic. You find what you were looking for, but it's just veiled a different way. Um, so yeah, it's just like his dedication to the craft, not giving a fuck about what people say, what other
Mm.
people are doing. People have criticized him for years, um, and people have doubted him, and now he's like doing his thing, and he's got athletes that are like coming up. There's guys who don't really work full time. They pursue grappling as their full time thing, and they like train specifically out of that gym. There's kids fucking moving from beautiful countries and like cities or whatever states, and they move to Rockville, Maryland to train with this guy. I mean, man, like he's truly like that's like an inspiration. He's said many things, but
It
just like
seems like he just gives so many athletes more than just it's more than just grappling, right? It is giving them it sounds like if people are flying from all parts of the world to be there, he's giving them more of a playbook to life. Like how do you navigate these situations not only on the mat but in life, right? And
yeah,
I mean, I can't think of another reason why someone would fly across the country like that if they were only getting, technique skills or how to get themselves in and out of certain positions. Like there has to be something that speaks of him as a person. One, not only from lessons that he gives, but two, it has to be the fact that he is beyond passionate about what he's doing, right?
yeah. When he speaks, you just listen. It's not
Yeah.
like someone's telling you to listen to him. It's just like he has this way, his this charisma, the way he speaks, this confidence because of everything he's proven out.
Yeah.
Um,
Tell me a
and
little about it. So really what I wanted to get into here was you've talked about a super unique approach coming from Greg and even Rob Gray's book, How to Move, which is called the ecological approach. Now, I watched that through a good bit and I love it. I absolutely love it, but it's traditional. It's not traditional from a standard way of drilling or going about learning anything. So you want to tell us a little bit about how it differs from the traditional approach?
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So I haven't given this spiel in like a while, and I haven't
Yeah.
like been reading up or catching up on it. So just bear with me here.
I
So
will.
uh, I would say there's like two schools of thought as far as skill development and just like motor learning. You have like the one, which is the traditional approach, which is uh, I'm going to show you a movement. I'm going to tell you how to do it. I'm going to instruct you how to move your body, how to place your body in certain ways. And then we're going to repeat that uh, over like a large volume of repetitions. So you could call that rote repetition. The other approach is the ecological approach. They call it like ecological dynamics theory. Um, eh, yeah.
So
So
the way that I kind of understood it is it like a you're learning more through problem solving. Is that like a good summary of it? Rather than like
I
if I'm relating it to pickleball and somebody's like, okay, let's go hit 100 third shot drops, or let's go hit 100 shots down the line. Um, the way that I've understood it and why it resonated with me so heavily is I thought of it of like, how do I get out of this situation? And so I saw an example that Greg Sounders put on his Instagram and kind of reiterated over and over again. Different scenarios where like he had one guy in the grappling position who was on a guy's back, right? And his goal through the entire thing was to just not let his chest leave the guy's back. So it didn't matter what move he was doing. It didn't matter, what positions he was to remain there. It was like his goal, his task through the entire thing was just to connect his chest to the guy's back at all costs, right? And kind of like problem solving through that way. Is that like on the right track?
I think like a task based objective is certainly like a way to achieve it.
Mm,
Basically, like so like those games and there's like the game based theory is definitely a large part of it. But what people are like aren't seeing is like what is happening underneath it. Like
mm,
why are you learning this way? The reason you're learning that way is because one perception. Um, Greg has talked about this before, so like a lot of things that I say is also borrowed from him. But he'll say
yeah.
like we don't learn like in a vacuum, right? You don't
Mm,
context all around us. Context literally is everything. We don't learn because of like things are like stored in our memory, and we're just like someone tells us how to do something, and then we just like remember off thought. Like that's not really entirely true about how we learn. We learn based on like perception, and also so there's like two main things. It's called affordances, and I would say um, invariants are probably an important part to the task. So like when you're looking at that task,
mm,
one is the affordances. You're looking at like what are the opportunities for action. And so you're seeing like if you go up to a door, you know that a door handle means you can pull. You know
mm,
that a door handle, that means you can push. When you look at like a pickleball paddle, you know that you don't fucking grab the pickleball paddle by the top of the paddle. You grab it by the handle because no one told you that. They're not like, hey, this is how you hold it. You just look at it, you go, okay, that looks like that's an opportunity for action. The
mm,
second thing is variant. So variant are properties that just do not change and that ring true no matter what. So like there are things about like when you take someone's back, there are things that ring true that it doesn't matter who it is. Every you could like an invariant is like they're like almost every person has like a fucking back, right? So like
yeah.
you know that it has like this certain surface, large area and surface. I guess like for pickleball, you know that the court dimensions are the same no matter or at least they're supposed to be the same no matter what court you're on. You know that it has like whatever the amount of feet, like 14 feet, 7 feet. You know, it's like certain length wide, has a net in the middle. But you know that's also true for certain movements. Like you know for like third shot drops, I think almost every instructor or coach or someone who's trying to instruct you on pickleball will say that like you need to one like bend your knees, but you also like your paddle has to be tipped down. I think Colin Johnson's pointed that out. He's like, no matter what, your paddle has to be like tipped down in order to hit like a third shot drop. So or like even topspin, right? Topspin does not change no matter what you're doing. You have to go from a low to high motion.
Hmm.
That is technically like an invariant. So that is like the ecological approach. Like there are definitely those like principles and terms someone would need to know and learn before like playing the game to a degree. Like Greg just disguises. He's been doing it for so long that it's not disguise. He just doesn't need to go into the terminology. He simplifies everything. That's what a good coach does. They don't
Mm,
do with all this other bullshit. He's just like make contact with the back, and that way it's that's another important thing about the ecological approach is I'm not telling you exactly how to do something. What I'm going to tell you is I'm going to give you cues and you define it for yourself so that you can find the movement solution for yourself. If he's like, make chest to back contact, he's not telling you like grab the person's head and like pull it towards you, or like grab the arm, pull it towards you. It's encouraging people to learn. This is where the problem solving thing comes into play. It's like
Yeah.
problem solving requires critical thinking, and it requires someone to explore a path for themselves. You give them an instruction or like a cue, but I'm not. The separation between the two is that rote repetition and traditional motor learning, they generally try to tell you like swing your body this way. I want you to turn your body. I want you to do this, and then rather like an ecological approach, they'll say like maybe when you finish the swing, I want your chest facing the bleachers to the left.
Mm.
It has somewhat an open interpretation, but it's allowing the person to like go through the movement without thinking of like, okay, so I need to move like 45 degrees this way. It's just, those coaches are fucking terrible. And
Have
it's
you
like
ever golfed?
um very briefly.
So the only reason I ask is because I think anybody who has golfed knows exactly what you're getting at. Where you're standing over a golf ball, you take a swing, coach is like, okay, tuck your elbow. All right, tuck my elbow. Coaches get over the ball, he's like, okay, loosen your grip. You're like, loosen my grip. He's like, okay, turn your back foot, open it up 45 degrees. Now, after iterations of that, you go out and play golf and you're standing over the golf ball and you're like, okay, elbow tucked, foot 45 degrees, grip loosed. And before you know it, you can't even swing the golf club because you have 7,000 swing thoughts in your head. So, like what you're getting at too from a traditional approach is if you're having all those thoughts in your head when you go out and try and play pickleball, how are you going to execute the swing? You do not have enough time to think all those thoughts. You really don't. So I get like the hey, you're trying to establish certain feelings or positions to reiterate it. It's like one or two thoughts. The reason that I love the ecological approach so much and why I was like, as I was learning it through you and I was diving into Greg, is the way that I've thought about it on the pickleball court. And then you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I kind of like taking this approach a lot. Is because it directly translates to the highest level of the game where you're playing that ultimate chess match and you're trying to analyze really quickly like what their strengths are, what their weaknesses, and there's not that big of a gap at the highest level, right? It's like minute positions you might catch them off balance in or not. So for me, if I'm drilling and I say I need to finish this point on the ground on the backhand, let's say it's a top spin rollie to the backhand or like a two-handed rollie to the backhand, I'm going to have to manipulate and move the player in a certain manner in order to finish there, right? So in real life translate, when I'm thinking about that, it's me identifying that that's the position I need to get to win and finish the point, and it's how do I get there? To your approach, it's how do I get there? It's not saying like, okay, let me hit a top spin drop and let me make sure that my angle of my paddle is correctly. Let me take a perfect reset. It's like you're naturally going to do whatever you can to set up the ball in order to finish at that position. That's kind of how I thought through it initially when I was trying to apply it to the pickleball court. It's just like same thing with the right hip on a righty in pickleball is usually highly exposed, right? That kind of like tucked chicken wing at the hip. So same thing, like if you know that's an exposed position, I can start, let's say it's at the baseline, let's say it's in the transition zone, let's say it's even at the kitchen. And this is where I associated to relating this to like different environments in pickleball, doing my best to kind of translate it. But I see how this would work tremendously because I think I do this a little bit subconscious, anyways. But it's the same aspect. It's like if I'm in transition zone, so that's where I'm limiting my environment. How do I finish this ball to the right hip? I know at this point that I'm going to find a way to do whatever in between in order to finish this ball at the right hip. But it's going to challenge me to problem solve and move a person probably a little bit differently than I normally would in order to get there and open it up. Right? Am I going about that relatively correctly if I can relate it to someone who wants to take this approach and, change a little bit of what they're doing on the pickleball court in order for growth, really?
Yeah, I think it's important to know like what's the task, um, and breaking a task down. So like
Mm,
I think the way Greg would do it is he always like naturally would progress things. It's like that chest to back was probably like maintain chest to back contact was probably the first or like the earlier part of the games, and then
Okay.
later on like opened up to find a way to like get to that person's back and maintain chest to back contact. After you maintain chest to back contact, um, well, I guess he probably wouldn't progress past that unless he like said you have to like submit or like advance to another position. Because if you look at dominant positions, it's like chest to chest, chest to back contact. Um, is like mostly the dominant positions that you would probably just want to like stick to.
So that
Uh,
sounds like you're looking to now be like 2 steps ahead, if that's what the iterations he's getting at. So if I'm going back to my example of finishing, let's say it's at the right hip or down at the backhand side of a player with like a two-handed backhand roll, kind of like James Ignatowicz. I'm doing that with the intent of getting a high ball, and then the next step is where do I finish it, right? Or how do I finish it? Is that kind of the same process there, where now you're adding the steps in order to physically complete the entire, I'll say, grappling session, or in this case, it is finishing the point in pickleball?
yeah, like that entire sequence. Yeah.
Totally. Now, have you? I know you're working on your pickleball game over there. Do you take yourself more of an ecological approach when you go drill?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I'll do. There's definitely people who want to do like the more like rote repetition route. I'm fine to entertain that
Mm,
because it's a drilling session. Like it's you give me some, I give you some. It's fine.
yeah.
But yeah, generally I always try to stick to games, and there are some people who I practice with where that is all we do is just like task based games. My only problem right now is that like I'm not spending enough time really thinking about these games and how to like at what point is this game in this like sequence, is it like an earlier stage, middle, or the later stage of it. So yeah, I just need to spend more time doing that. I think we definitely get stuck in some like rote repetition, because
What
sometimes it feels like you are progressing, but I think there's also um, room for both for some people. Some people like to do both. There's like former tennis players who have come up through that type of programming. So yeah.
I think I do think there's room for both. So me coming from a hockey background and not tennis, hitting a topspin, a heavy topspin forehand drive was a super struggle for me at first, right? I think that's been the biggest learning curve. Coming from hockey, I think the fast hands and the quick hands and the soft touch translated, but not having that, even though I played golf, it's a different point of contact. So it took me a while to make that movement. Now, that's where I would also say there is room for repetition because I just needed to find the feel. But what you're getting at from an ecological approach is like what is that feel? It's not the fact that my elbow is tucked or that, or maybe it's where it may be more finishing over my shoulder, or for me, it is really taking the ball out in front of me that has led me to have better forehand drive. It's really low to high, make sure I'm taking the ball in front. That's the feeling that I needed. Right. Um, I wanted to at least ask you though, when you are drilling, some of the games that you're playing, what are those games that you're doing to work on in the drilling that you're doing? What are the games?
Yeah, so people could find there's like one video that I had put on my channel that was like about attacking.
Okay.
It's basically just two people across each other at the kitchen, and you just assign like one person is attacking, one person is just countering. We've seen that before, but then okay, like how can we drill this down even more so that we're getting specific outcomes out of it? One thing was like when Braden Pickleball Effect was in town, it was like, okay, if I'm assigned the attacker, I'm player A, the attacker, I can only attack to your forehand side. So it's like, okay, that benefits me because I have a target. If I have a target, then I know whether or not I'm completing the task. If I hit it anywhere else, then I'm not completing the task right. And it's like also, is the intention that I set producing producing uh, the outcome, the desired outcome. And if
Mm,
I'm doing okay for Braden, it also helps him like okay, like, yes, he knows the ball is going there. So like, what does his counter look like? So if we wanted to add some variability is important for higher level people. That is like something I did discover through like Greg and through the books. Like you do want more variability at the higher levels. So now it's like, okay, if he knows if I'm going there every time, so I'm gonna make up this rule. Um, 90% of the balls will go to your right. The other 10% will go to the other side. I think Greg is the one. I'm almost like certain Greg is the one who told me this,
Okay.
because that way you're not creating this like predictable outcome. And even then, that's not a bad thing to create a predictable outcome in a game. Um, but
You go back
so
and
like
forth
that,
with Greg on how to apply this to pickleball.
uh, two, I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago, I talked to Greg because I was trying to ask him about how to get better,
Mm,
and this was something that he like. I didn't even know that he was employing this on me at the time. He was just like, "Here's like what you want to do, like do this and do that." It was all these like things of like create your own conditions for winning, um, like always have like a target that you're like hitting towards. Whenever I was like thinking about practice, not games, and and then once I realized about the ecological approach, once I learned about it, I was like, oh fuck, he's been telling me, he's basically been employing this on me without saying it,
yeah,
literally to me the whole time, and that's just like such another such a great thing about him. It's just like a true coach. Like man, they just know how to like teach you without feeling like you're being taught.
totally, totally.
Yeah,
I think that that's what makes a great coach, right?
yeah.
You have so kind of leading also into that. So, with the drilling perspective, you've interviewed a lot of the high level players at this point. A lot of the high level players, from the both of the Johns Bros to Tyson, pretty much the whole entire Yola team. And they did Anna Bright too, um, and you also did Genie Bouchard. So, in that series, have there been things that they've given you that you've been like, huh, let me go and try this in my drilling routine, or huh, I didn't realize like that's something I actually need to start taking to the court to work on?
I'm not really sure, and I think it's more because I didn't frame the questions like that. But if you look
Mm.
at their content, you have like Ben and Colin's content, Jack Monroe's content, Zane. Genie doesn't really have player content. Yeah, there's other like players with that like kind of content. There's definitely, yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot of people who still subscribe. Is it subscribe or prescribe? Subscribe,
So I think
prescribe.
it would be prescribed if it was like I don't know, a magazine or newsletter. I know that but it's totally on YouTube. It's like subscribe to their channel, right?
Yeah, they
Um,
like prescribe to that like that methodology or that way of
yes,
learning. Yeah.
totally. The only reason I asked the question is because if you go through a lot of the content, and I'll give a shout out to Kyle Kazoot and that pickleball guy. So in his school, and he's actually started to go into like very great detail of like him and Tanner working together and exactly what they're talking about in order to prepare for matches. And the reason that I asked you that behind the scenes is because I think there's a lot of tremendous content out there that is, I'll say, from beginner to 4.0 level, even 4.5. I think there's a minute amount of content that really talks about what it's like playing at the pro level and what those thought processes are. And even the semi pro level, if we're talking about qualifiers. Like, what is the difference maker that allows these people to consistently play at that level in comparison to your standard rec or average amateur? So I was wondering if there was anything behind the scenes that they gave you of like, hey, here's what I would recommend going doing. And if there isn't, that's perfectly fine. But I at least wanted to see if there was for
Uh,
my own selfishness.
yeah. No, it's definitely interesting. There's like a lot of that beginner content, which
Yeah.
like I'm not saying there's just only one way to do it, but it is very interesting the way some of that bigger beginner content works. Is like yes, I guess my analogy is like two people make $100,000. There's one person who's been in the 9 to 5 job where they had a very predictable route and they were told exactly how to do something. Um, It's almost like someone like going to school as like a doctor. It's like you're told the exact way the route to get there, and there's other person who's like an entrepreneur. It's like
Mm,
who do you will be better off if they're both fired from their jobs and nothing happens and they have to restart from ground one again? Is it going to be the person who's been told exactly how to do something and accomplish it, or is it going to be the person who found the way through like light guidance and some like having some guardrails up and being like guided in some manner, but mostly finding it for themselves? And I think like when I look at a lot of that beginner content, I think something a very important distinction to make between the ecological approach and the traditional approach is that the traditional approach will get you the results. It'll get you up there and you're going to be like, "Oh man, like I love the way this person described this, like how to do this certain thing." Not only it's got a few issues with that for me personally. It's like, okay, one problem with that is like that just sucks the fun out of it for me personally. Like I'm not
I
exploring it.
agree.
Not
I
only
agree.
that, yeah, it's like not only that, but how how much better off is that person going to be when like it comes down to the time where they might have to perform or they have like maybe like they're susceptible to like choking under pressure and they're like competing. It's like
Mm,
are they going to be in that competing environment and be thinking about like, oh well, this person said to do like this and do it this way versus like the other person who's like just a natural problem solver and not a natural problem solver, it's a bad way to put it, just learned through like critical thinking and like self-discovery and also like problem solving and not being instructed like from like point A to D of like exactly how to do something like step by step instructions. And you can see that in difference of like certain players. There's some people who are just more adaptable, and that's like I guess that is actually like what I'm alluding to is like
yeah.
is adaptable and malleable, or are they just like this stiff person who can only live by instructions? And that's like, who is the more creative person? Does the more creative person thrive in the long run? It's very easy to take the traditional approach and realize, like, oh, well, I learned how to do like a third shot drop so quickly. It's like, okay, well, do you know how to apply like what you learned to different facets of the game and be able to like really expand on that? Anyways, yeah, I figured I just like had to get that off, like kind of, yeah, get that off my chest because I think it is very easy to be like led down that way to see like, oh well, like everyone wants the fast food, the McDonald's to skill development. They want the quick, easy, and very fast way to do it. Um, but when you put the work in and then you like find your own way and through that, it's a much different reward.
I think most of the things in life that are like that, and this is why you have to be patient, are more of like a hockey stick or J-shaped curve than they are linear, as you just talked about. And the reason that the ecological approach resonated with me so much is because when I try and look and analyze the top of the game, even when I go and watch in person or I'm watching film online, um, even though film online is much more challenging than in person. But something that you keyed in on that all of the top players have is that ability to adapt. Meaning, not only can they play slow, not only can they play fast, can they play somewhere in between? Can they be deceptive? Meaning, can they show one thing, make you think they're doing one thing, and then actually do another? That's that problem solving that you're talking about, that you're literally consistently doing in every shot and every single point at the highest level. So it's I've at least recognized that yes, you kind of build this foundation of like, can I take all of these shots? Yes, I can. But the next level that I've at least seen and have talked about with some people on the podcast is like the best reference that I can put you is one of the coaches that I worked with, Angelo Rossetti, and another coach I had on the podcast. His name is Sky Kim. One of them references as water, one references as clay, but it's the same thing. And they talk about being like water or like clay on the court, where like you are adapting consistently to your environment. Because as you mentioned earlier in the ecological approach, like your environment is never the same, right? It's very unique to that day and that situation. So how are you going to take all the skills that you have now and employ them correctly in order to work your way or problem solve your way out of this situation? So I love it. And I at least the reason leading back to my ultimate question from like asking if Ben Johns or Colin or Genie or any of them, Jack Monroe or Zane, gave you anything is because that's at least what I've seen as the separator is that ability to adapt and problem solve at a very, very rapid rate. Truly.
Yeah, that's why those people at the top are very interesting. And I also think that's why it's interesting what's happening with the Johns brothers. Uh,
Mm.
yeah, they've just been known for
I was gonna
their.
tell me. I was gonna say, tell me what you think is happening with the Johns brothers.
Yeah, I mean, there's like so many different things, right? Like Ben and Colin have also grown much older than they were in the past, maybe like 4 years. Not much older, but they've grown, and they've with that comes more businesses and more opportunities. So I think like they probably have that to consider as a factor. But two, like paddles have changed, balls have changed, but also like there's a growing number of different players now. Like there's so many more ex tennis players than there were in the past, I think, and they're also like much more high caliber. But you look at like Ben and Colin, they're known for only drilling, or majority of their time spent drilling is with themselves. Colin has been known to deviate off and drilling with other people.
Mm.
Not that though, but they're also known for their rote repetition drilling. So it's not to say like obviously I've never sat in on a practice that they've had themselves. I'm sure they do like they have like their strategy and different things like that. But it's interesting because they're not able to break their pattern now. Now, like, and this goes back to that thing about like I guess like somewhat of like the growth mindset and like if you're not growing, you're dying. But like you see these, they're taking a lot more L's right now. But part of me thinks that this is part of their adaptation phase of them like learning and figuring things out. I also could definitely be wrong. That's me. That's my like more positive and like optimistic side because I want them to figure this out. If they can and they go back to winning multiple times in a row, then like then it's truly impressive. But right now they're taking all these L's not only in MLP but also like PPA, and they're losing to, like they're not just losing the doubles, but they're also losing singles. Like Ben is losing singles too. So it's like what is the factor there? It's like Ben and Colin have played a certain way for so long, and it did work for a very good amount of time, and they like accomplished so much. But it's like, okay, well, what's happening now? Why can't they adapt to guys like Fed and Hayden? Like, why aren't they creating new patterns? Why aren't they doing like different, like novel things?
Mm.
And somewhat they've been a little bit more like aggressive. People have talked about, but um, yeah, it's interesting because yeah, there's certain players like Gabe and Andre. Granted, I think the Johns brothers have more wins over them than Gabe and Andre do, but they have like dethroned them like a couple times. You also see like why haven't J Dub and Dylan beaten the Johns brothers, but all these other people can. So yeah, I think like that whole like adaptable thing is like really interesting.
And I think that you have to adapt to grow in general, right? And I think that's the point that you're making. If it is pickleball or anything else, it's your environment is going to change at some point, right? Naturally. So yes, there is something to be said about if the wheel's not broke, don't fix it. But behind the scenes, you need to be ready for the environment to change. And I think that's where, if I am alluding to Ben and Colin too, because I agree with you on this take, is that they had a recipe that has worked for so long and they were hesitant on changing it. And that's why they've taken a lot of losses in the meantime and are being forced to adapt, right? So I think it would be awesome journey if you see them adapt and play a completely different style of pickleball and still sit on the top, because that is more of a growth journey than anything. Is like you've grown all the way up here, you've sat up here on the top of the hill. Eventually somebody's going to knock you down, but how far do you fall in order to then bounce back? And I think that hero journey that a lot of people talk about is like, the rise and fall and the rise again. I think there's so much gold in that journey because someone who was originally at the top gets knocked off and has to find their way back.
Yeah, Ben. It's weird because Ben and Anna Lee have not had any issues, right?
Yeah, that's a different story.
Granted, like Anna Lee's like a whole nother animal, and I think like she's like very adaptable. Um, you see her,
So,
yeah,
yeah, she has totally an elite skill of problem solving. Totally an elite
yeah,
skill of problem solving. Like, it's not only the fact that she could take so many shots, is like she takes so many of the right shots at the right time, and she's never thinking one step. She's thinking two or three ahead. So even when she
yeah,
takes a speed up, she is so ready for the next ball and the ball after that to come to her that that is the reason that she finishes so many points. Is that
yeah.
she's thinking two, three steps ahead and super adaptable.
Yeah, I was talking to Blaine Hovenier at dinner
Okay.
when we were in Las Vegas, and I was like, "What makes?" We were just happening to be talking about Anna Lee. I was like, "What makes like Anna Lee like when you're playing against her? Like, what is it?" And he's like, "Dude, her anticipation is like through the roof. Like she knows where you're gonna hit, and she's already there before you're like even swinging." I was like, "Damn, that's sick."
So if you haven't seen it, I posted a short because I've been to this point. I've been trying to watch a lot of film on Anna Lee. I do also watch a lot of film on Christian Alshon, just because one, he's through his growth period. Not that he's not an also just an athletic unit, right? But he's been getting a lot of advice from Leigh Waters. So it's like, okay, what did he employ that was from her that has gotten him from just being an athlete coming from tennis to now being a consistent top performer? But also on the Annalise side, it was a slow mo that I took at Major League Pickleball in Central Park. And she rolls a ball to her right. So it should be like the backhand of the left side player. She then, rather than moving towards the ball to cover space, she takes this itty bitty step left in the opposite direction. So she rolls right and takes a small step left. And guess what it did? It literally had Jackie Kawamoto put a ball to her right, and before she even hit it, I love that for me. Before she even hit it, Annalise now already moving right and finishes a roll across court, literally baiting her right into it by this. And I'm not telling you like she like made a lot of space. She literally just all she hit right, small move left just to make the opening a little bit larger, then closed it, took it, finished at the point. So it's totally those small pieces of anticipation in the chess match that make her that elite. And having obviously her next to Ben, where Ben is a super consistent player, right? She now gets to employ all of her skills, all of her tactics, and really make you work to beat them. And you see that on the court. You really do. Because they make the best teams sometimes look like they don't know how to play pickleball, which is crazy to me. So like a key match that I watched was Ben and Anna Lee versus Alshon and Anna Bright. And Alshon and Anna Bright are obviously both elite players on the other side, even in mixed. And this is in the finals, right? So although they may have had a little bit of an off day, it was just like the pressure never came off. Like they never took the foot off the gas. Uh, I want to pivot for you for a little bit here, if you're okay with that,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you have a couple cool things coming up. You just posted about being at Worlds, and you're gonna play in a fun match against the Olsen brothers, and then you're gonna play with Braden from that Pickleball Effect. But I'm gonna say a quote that you posted on your story, which was, and this was alluding to the opportunity of playing in this match at Worlds in November in Dallas, which was just grateful to absolutely dust these sissies on the tube. Would you like to tell me uh, what you are alluding to in that comment?
Chris and Isaac are bums, and I'm going to show the entire world why. No, I love those guys.
Oh,
I hope I don't know when this will go out, but
yeah.
yeah. you got to. I'm sure. I don't know how many people are going to see this, but you have to market. You have to find a ways to get people, get seats, get butts in the seats,
Yeah.
and I'm experimenting. I get it. A lot of people are going to think like I'm probably serious, but no, man, I'm not serious. I love like Chris is always been a really great guy to me. Isaac as well, always like super cool. But it's just easy and fun to pick on them. And look, they set it up right. Like
Yeah.
they asked for it. Whoever set it up. So someone's got to create some story, some drama.
A good bit of our audience is in the pickleball space. So I think anybody that is involved in the pickleball space knows, whether it's you guys, whether it's Kyle, whether it's somebody else, everybody is always like 3-5 at best, right? Talking about Chris Olsen. So I think everybody understands that it's totally a sarcastic manner. But I love that you all are so willing to really create a fun storyline. And I think that's what sell you're right. That's what sells seats. That's what gets people there and that's what hypes it up. But that will be a really, really cool event. Worlds is going to be fun. There's so many top players going. Where
Are you
is
going to be
that?
there?
I want to be. I'm trying to find a way there currently. I have a high level podcast actually with Dr. Cassidy Preston, who I'll have to introduce you to. He's a super interesting mind. And he comes from the hockey space. So currently, I am not going to be there, but I would like to get there to really film a bunch of content and interview some of the major people there. So maybe, maybe, but
Yeah,
I'm get.
yeah.
I already know you're going to be there. What do you? So let me ask you this: so you're planning the event. You called out a couple of people, called them a couple of sissies, and now, what does that day now look like you from a content creator standpoint? Like, how are you leveraging an opportunity like this for you on your page?
Yeah, I've thought about this. So my initial thought was, whenever I like try to start any content project, it really is, and if it's with another brand, it's like, what is the goal for that brand? Maybe it's like product placement, maybe it's brand exposure, maybe it's to share like whatever their story is. So like I've tried asking the PPA like, what are you guys focused on right now? And so like leading up to the event, now that I am playing in this event, I think that will be what majority of my content is directed at. But for me personally, like I want to be able to share the experience of what PPA Worlds is like. Um, I think it's, I don't even know how many people captured it the previous year, USA Nationals last year. Like I did create a video for it, and I just want to create something that makes people feel like they're there. So like, yeah, I guess that is two content pieces, but also I'm
Yep.
going to look at brands I can work with. Um, I'm, I'll be honest, I'm not the best at planning these things ahead of time. Like my focus very much is focus on like those two things. But if I have like a brand that I can work with, then I like to create like an entire suite of um, like like products and results for them. So like, that is something that I picked up through this entrepreneurship journey, right? Like everyone's like, oh, like I can't believe you do everything by yourself. And yes, I could probably maybe hire people, but I can do social media. I can create like a content campaign. I can do photo. I can do video. Like someone, I don't know if they want me to release this or not. So there's like a pro that asked me. He's like, hey, what would it cost to have you set up the podcast for us?
Yeah.
So different services like that, but like most of it is like focused for like a certain brand. It's like, hey, like this is what happened with the event, right? Like Kitchen, KTCHN, they came in town for the event. Well, they actually came in town for the podcast. And then I was like, hey, if you're gonna be here, let's make sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck while you're here, because they're traveling from Southern California. So I was like, okay, well, like we'll host an event. Okay, if we host an event, what's in it for you guys? You guys become we become like brand partners in this entire thing, but also I can create content for you. I get photo and video. I take photos of people like checking out your merchandise, things like that, people wearing your merchandise. You guys can, I batch everything. This is 1 day's worth of shooting that should last you probably a month. And I took
Mm.
this from Chris Kim. He's a videographer, photographer in the area. But it's like this mindset of batching things. And then, like, not only do you get photo, you also get video. Not only that, we also get to launch the podcast. So that's like 3 pieces of content. Before the event, I'm including you in one of the like brand partner introductions. So that's 5 pieces. A 6 piece is the vlog from the event. So that's number 6. And then once I get done editing the podcast, there's going to be a minimum of probably 4 clips from that. And you're also going to have the podcast. So it's like 10 pieces of content for this brand. Um, so that's generally what I like to think about. I don't even know at this point if I answered your question, but hopefully I
You
did.
did, and this is what I was really trying to tailor into is you did bring up your event, which I wanted to talk about more. And both of them combine into what I wanted to get into on your end is like how you even go about bringing in revenue in any capacity when doing these creative events. Because I don't think a lot of people think about that half is it's like you're creating all this content, but now how are you leveraging this content creation to actually bring revenue in the door, right? To leverage to some degree, because you could only do content for free for so long until you can no longer pay the bills, right? That's what we talked about at the beginning. So, first, we'll talk about like going into your social event. What did you do to be like, I want to put on this event, but I need to find a way to also make it worth not only my only brands partnerships, right? Make it worth their time and their investment, but also on my end, create them a high quality piece of content. Like, how do you make it leverageable for both parties?
Like 2 things, like one, my
Yeah.
portfolio, but two, the like viewership. At the end of the day, like that's just all brands care about. Whether you have a YouTube channel, you're throwing events, all they care about, not all they care about, but most of what they care about is like how many people can you get to pay attention to this one thing. That one thing could be their product or their brand. The second thing is like I don't think I had without what currently have with my platform. I don't think I have that foundation to rely on for these brands to be like that, to use that as a selling point. People don't know. Without that, like these brands, they would be like, why would we trust you to film this? Why would we trust you to throw this event? But like I built some credibility throughout the like pickleball space just based on like the photography, the videography, things like that, and like my ability to like create content that is maybe like somewhat unique,
Yeah.
somewhat just like different, and it's like, or can you be like a voice of authority? Can you, or do you have an ability to persuade an audience in a way? And it doesn't always have to be through purchasing. It's like could just be clicking something. Um, so, what was the question again?
So really, I wanted to. So what you're get really what I asked was how do you make it leverageable for both parties? So what you're getting at is it's a transaction of, hey, I'm going to create this content for you for this event. Here's the amount of eyeballs you're physically going to get on your product that is really targeted to their market, right? And I think that's why so many small creators are super leverageable rather than a TV ad, right? Because you get to target your specific audience with that following. Uh,
Yeah.
the the second piece that I would want to ask you is like, did you just make content for a long time for free in the hope that you would get here? Like, or like, what was when you first started? Did you first say like, how do I make this and increase my revenue from it, or even make money from it? Or were you like, you did a whole year creating content for free, betting on yourself, saying, you know what, if I create this portfolio now, there is going to come a time when someone wants to partner with me.
Yeah. Okay. I wrote it down so I'll remember this time. So
You're
the first question um, is the brands. So like another large piece of that is like 2 of the sponsors came because of like one party. So like Eastside Paddle Club, that was the venue, that's the facility, right? And because of them, they also have a partnership with Ghost. Ghost was also on board. So we've got
yep.
like one, we got a very large name. 2, we got a venue. We have like a place to play. So like I actually genuinely believe that one telltale sign of success is one's like ability to network. So how are you in building relationships with people? Like, do you hold resentments? Do you hold grudges? Can you not take things personally? Um, the reason I say that is because the founder of Eastside Paddle Club, Tarab Kambadi, and everyone who works there, all the great employees, they are the reason why we had the venue and why this was like mostly even possible in the first place. So like I made it worthwhile for, let's like look at the list. Make it worthwhile for Eastside Paddle Club because I get people into their facility. People
Mm.
get, and this is majority of these people have never been here, don't even know this place exists. So like I make it worthwhile for them because they have new visitors and potential signups for members. Ghost, I created content for them. They also get their brand out there, and also like in my video, I'll film, I'll include footage of people drinking the product, so they get a little bit of exposure. Ghost is also a freaking massive brand. Um, Third was like KTCHN. They get to set up their booth, so they have a physical presence there. Also,
Mm.
again, create the content. Fourth was Pretty Cute Coffee. Okay, like they're upstairs in the Eastside Paddle Club. I'm driving people towards your business, and people are actually buying the product. But also, leading up to the event, I talked about all of these brands. Sweat Pals, not really a brand sponsor, but they were the platform we used. Again, I could bring people into using the platform.
Mm.
Um, I think the fifth was Selkirk. Selkirk was great. Selkirk was huge.
I saw
For
that.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about how they just like gave us all that product for an event where like I don't even have a massive relationship with them. I do have a relationship with someone who works for them who really
Yeah.
helped me out. Um, but for them, it was like, okay, like what kind of content can we get? Okay, not only do I do the brand introduction, but I'll talk about the one piece that was not relatable for the other brands was the testimonials. It was like I get people to talk about their product in a natural way. I really do. I was like, don't don't fake it.
Yeah.
Don't just tell me what I want to hear because I'm holding the camera. Give me an honest review of like what you think about this product. They gave us like six different paddles, right? So they have a testimonial right there that I'm gonna be um, blasting all throughout social media. And then I almost forgot the last sponsor, which was U Drippin. They provide grips. Oh yeah, Texas Ranchers actually just dropped some, but U Drippin, like my grip sponsor, it's like, dude, if you can send us some product, would love to like also again testimonials, product placement, get this brand in people's hands. And these are all like mostly beginners, mostly novice players. So that's like another content pillar is the product testimonials. I think that's like huge. So
I
that's
think
like
that's a
leveraging.
fantastic way to go about it. Fantastic
Sorry.
way to go. I said I think that's a fantastic way to go about it.
Yeah.
Um, and the question that I have alluding to that is, are they saying, are they basically paying you for you saying, here's the amount of people that are probably going to see it? Or what does that transaction look like for you?
Yeah. So I only got, to be totally transparent, I only got
Yeah.
paid from one of the brands.
Okay.
Um, and from them, it was like, yeah, mostly it was like the exposure, but it was like, okay, like all these different content pieces that I'm creating, like I'm not doing this for every brand.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to give you these deliverables and all these files that you can use, then you essentially just hired a photographer and a videographer. So,
Totally.
um, yeah. And then, like, yeah, your second question was like making content for free.
Yeah.
I got really lucky, man. This brand right here, like Vuori, this is like not only just like a brand I love to wear, but they sponsored me very early on when I didn't have like much going on, and I would give a shout out to them because
Yeah.
they've we've re-signed. We did like a trial period, then we re-signed, and like they're a really big reason why I'm even still here now and doing this thing because they gave me some money to some like financial stability to like keep injecting into this project, like buying new cameras, fixing up my studio. Now I can film the podcast like out of my house instead of having to rent a studio and dealing with, I don't even want to go into the bullshit that I've gone through,
Yeah.
like booking through other people's studios. But yeah, I made content. I still make some content for free. I think a lot of that now depends on like, again, Chris Kim, my buddy, is like, who is the content for? But
Yeah.
when you really, like, this goes back to the growth mindset, when you really like narrow down your focus and you put your head down and you build up a skill set, like, I'm not just blowing smoke up my own ass, but I think my photos and my videos have gotten to a good point where it's like, hey, this looks like a qualified person that I could hire for videography or photography services. So now my content, I'm at a point where I can charge a little bit. But it's not even just like the content of like the physical photo and video, it's also like the storytelling. Can I create a compelling story? Can I tell someone else's story in a good way? Um, so yeah, I think that's an important role for content creators nowadays. I heard this on some podcasts. They're saying like content creators have become better at describing and talking about products better than the founder or employees of the company. So yeah.
That is, and I completely agree with that take. I really do. And the reason that I asked the question is because I think you have tremendous insight on the path for anybody that wants to take a similar route, right? And wants to leverage content creation in whatever niche that they are in. But I think the struggle is always like, one, how do you start and where? And then two, how do you get financial backing to continue? Because I think a lot of people run out of runway. And that's the unfortunate part is there's so many good ideas, but like the runway just gets cut short. So, what made Vuori bet on you? Did you reach out to them and send them an email and say, "Hey, here's the idea of what I want to do," and they were like, "You know what? We love it. Let's take a bet on this guy."
Yeah, so I've talked about this also before as non-endemic brands. It's basically brands outside of the space that you're living in now.
Yeah.
It's like my pursuit was not really for pickleball brands. There are great pickleball brands, but there's a multitude of reasons.
Yeah.
One of them was that reason. It's like I can also pursue someone with a larger budget. But two, it's like if I stuck to one pickleball brand, generally what you see is like you'll see guys sponsored by like guys or girls sponsored by maybe like a brand like Selkirk. They can't take on apparel sponsorships. They also, if you're a content creator, you won't get products from other people. Like, man, I get products from amazing brands, and I'm like super, super fortunate for it. But it also meant that I said no to other people. So it's like if you're a Selkirk sponsored player, you're not going to get like 6-0, Vatic Pro, Bread and
Mm.
Butter, all these brands. Um, so sorry, man, I like trailed off again. What was your question?
You're good. You're good. You're good. You were getting there. You were totally getting there. In summary, in conclusion, it was what made Vuori bet on you at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
reached out. Sorry, yeah. I reached out to them. I was like 6 or 7 months into my podcast, and I was like, I need a sponsorship. I had like a decent amount of views, nothing crazy, but I think it's also about like I have had experience building out cold emails. I used to be like a technical recruiter, like very early in my like years on this, like very early in my age. Um, so it's like, okay, like I create a compelling email, but I also, you want to make it so it's like, let's create a trial period. And that's what it was with Vuori. It's like, hey, we'll do like X number of ads. If you can meet this threshold, then we'll continue again. And I did meet that threshold. So it's like, okay, yes, I created the ads, but I also created content outside of that. I had my Instagram post. I
Mm.
fucking told everyone I knew about this Vuori deal. Like I was blasting it everywhere. People not pickleball. I go up to strangers and I see them with a V on the shorts. I'm like, yo, if you like that brand, go to vuori.com/building pickleball. You'll get 20% off your order. It's ridiculous, but it's like a guerrilla warfare tactic of
Yeah.
just going up to people and not caring like what the how you may be perceived and just like let them know. And now I've like told millions of not millions of people. I've told a bunch of people, and it took a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of videos where the ad probably didn't do successful, but then sometimes you just need that one to hit, like the Genie Bouchard video. Dude, that thing's up to like 108,000
I
views. And
saw that.
yeah,
Hell
it's
yeah.
crazy. And
It's
I slipped
crazy.
that Vuori ad in there. But I also looked at them. They tried to get into pickleball before. It was actually the MLP 2021, I think,
Okay.
2021 too. And they had like created a Vuori pickleball paddle and all that stuff. And I don't know who was fostering the relationship with them, but I don't imagine it went well because I didn't see a renewal or things like that. So I was like, cool. They've tried to get into this space. And this goes back to my point about non-endemic brands. we as people in this space are responsible for, if we want the sport to grow, bringing brands on the outside, bringing them into pickleball.
Totally.
Yeah.
And you just I watched the interview that you did. I think it was APP Newport, and you did one with the CRO,
Oh
and
yeah, that guy's awesome.
awesome. And you guys, and coming up, I don't know when after this podcast, but coming up, we're going to have Ken Herman, the founder of the APP, on as well. So that'll be great to kind of allude to exactly what you're talking about, which is in that conversation you have with the CRO. He emphasized the fact that you need to bring outside brands outside of pickleball in order to grow the sport as a whole and get more exposure. And to the point that you made of like, they have larger budgets, right? There's more money to work with. And if you keep it to this circle of just pickleball, it's going to stay to the circle of just pickleball. So I think that is a huge important emphasis, and I think that's impressive that you kind of use that same mentality rolling into how you wanted to go about sponsorships with the podcast. Definitely notes that I've taken on that too, selfishly in this conversation.
Yeah. And look, we're not trying to force these brands in here. These brands
Yeah,
want to be in, see the viewership. Again, my thing about viewership, they see it and they're
yeah,
like, okay, like there's a great opportunity here, but how do I get in? And I don't think like buying a booth at a at a certain event. I won't name any names, but there was a brand that bought a booth at an event and they said it was like X amount of dollars and they just got nothing out of it. And
yeah,
I'm saying I figured that out. I think ROI is very, very hard to measure because there's like indirect ROI. You might show someone a product now and then 6 months later they'll buy it. But then like, are you connected to that purchase? They might just see it somewhere. So like, I think it's very difficult, but we do, that's another part of our job, is that if we bring brands into this space, we need to do it with respect and like with some type of intentionality and carefulness.
How do you go about that? If you want to use Vuori as the example, you can, because I know that what you just like mentioned, obviously they're your biggest sponsor that has really propelled you to where you are today. How do you go about showing them? I'll say pre, where you are today. I'll say let's say somewhere in the middle, even when you started. After the trial period, how did you go about showing them that the return is there for them? Right? You said they had you meet a threshold. Was that threshold a certain number of views? Like, what did that threshold look like?
They never told me what it was, but like I imagine it was like I had to meet some quota. So it's like, okay, I had to make sure that my next videos that I did include the ad in were going to be
Mhm.
videos that I had a higher level of certainty. I never really know which videos are going to pop off. I thought the one with
Mhm.
Connor would do better. I didn't think Genie Bouchard was going to do that good because she already has other interviews, and also like how relevant is she at this particular moment. So it's also like making sure that you know your content, but you also have to know your audience. It's like if I didn't know that, then I would have just stuck those ads in any video. But I did have like 3 ads to work with. Maybe one of them went in the 6-0 video, which that one did really well, like the 6-0 podcast, the Vatic Pro podcast as well. So there's certain podcasts there, but it was also like, what ideas are you coming out with? And this is something I've talked about. I keep saying that, but it's something I've talked about in the past. It's like, I actually talked about with Kyle Kazuda, is like, if you have an opportunity or you have someone in mind that you want to create an opportunity with, don't go to them and be like, hey, let's collaborate. That's a really shitty way to ask someone to do the work for you. I think that's like a terrible, terrible first impression. Um, so, like, the reason I bring that up is because from Fiore is like, okay, I have to over deliver. What does over delivering look like? Okay, I'll have like the YouTube ads. I'll also do like some photography shoots, but also like I want to model their like clothing and I want to like show people why do I like it, like how often do I wear it, and something else that did eventually happen is I got whitelist ads with them. So like I don't know, are you familiar with whitelist ads?
I'm not. So tell me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So basically, it's like those ads that you see on Instagram that's in collaboration. It would be like Vuori and Building Pickleball, and like
Oh
it's
yeah,
ad.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like an ad like I created or like some content creator created, and then that content creator gets paid X amount of money, but also like that brand reaches their audience. So like that's something I got with Vuori. We had created two in the past, and I also just renewed a contract with them to do October, November, December. So just give me a heads up, people. If you see my ugly face all over like your Instagram, that I'm sorry, but it's gonna happen for the next like 3 months. So
You I unknowingly at the time, so I did like a small thing on the failure coach page with a hydration brand. The brand is Salty, SALTT. And I made a few content clips of them, and then I was getting ads of it on myself early on, and I'm like, oh, that's me. And then I literally see my account with theirs, and what to your point, I had people reaching out to me and say like, "Hey, I saw your face on Instagram in this ad. Should I buy this product?" And I was like, "I mean, I'm using it every single day now, so I would say, yeah, you probably should go and use the product." But they're a hydration packet like most people, potassium, magnesium, sodium involved, right?
oh nice.
So, anyways, with that being said, I just did not know it was called whitelisted ads at the time.
Yeah,
But I will tell you that it also gave me on my end a massive amount of reach
yeah,
because even I submitted the ad to them. They did what they did to run it as a sponsored ad. And then the addition to me is like I got a lot of views on the ads that they ran, right? So my reach on those was beyond what it would normally be on the account, which led to more following, which led to a couple more opportunities in the space, which was great. So it was well worth the investment that I made in creating the content for them to go and use it. But I think that they do that with a lot of creators. So if you don't give them a high quality piece of content that they think is worth paying for as a run ad, they're not going to run it. And then
yeah,
therefore you're only getting the upfront whatever payment it is, and you're not getting the extra on top of it. So you do need to exceed the amount of value to a certain extent that they believe that they're going to receive, because then that's where it's going to pay 5, 10x, right?
yeah. Like quality has to be embedded in like your brand if you want quality
Yeah,
products or
totally.
partnerships. Yeah, and I think that's another thing they saw is like, hey, love that you used film for the whitelist ad. Like I have a buddy, his name's Drew. He shot film photos for like the
Okay.
photo shoot, and they're like, oh man, like love that. And so it's like you just have to think like maybe a little bit outside the box. You don't have to do things completely different. It goes back to Virgil Abloh's 3% rule. You just have to take something that already exists, change it by 3%, and it's a novel and new idea.
What rule is that? I like that.
Virgil Abloh's 3% rule.
Mm,
You know what Virgil is?
I don't. I don't. I feel like
Oh
I've
shit,
heard that
my
before.
bad.
You're good. I feel
Y-
like I've heard that before and have used it myself, but didn't know where it came from. So that's why I asked you about it.
Yeah, Virgil's the creator of like Off White. He's like an American fashion designer and entrepreneur. He
Okay.
worked with like stuff. He actually passed away, I think, from like cancer or something. In I don't know what date. 2021. He's like an icon. Yeah.
I love that. So the reason I wrote it down in my notebook is because he's probably going to be the next person that I go and do an extensive amount of research on. Um,
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to go back to, because we did collect a lot of information, and then I'll give you a couple of our closing questions. But one thing I wanted to go back to is about your event, because that was kind of a big thing for you, right? And the biggest thing that I wanted to ask was if you had, I know you had some fear, but inevitably, but like, did you have fear that people were not going to sign up and you had all these sponsors that were involved and like you're putting on this event and like it falls flat? Like, how did you
Oh,
navigate that piece of it?
100%. I thought that
Yeah.
from like I always think that, right? I always think I'm gonna like fail, but it's never like determined. It's like okay, then like what do I do in order to not reach that? So your question was like, did I concern over the attendees show up?
Yeah, how did you navigate um the attendees showing up and even like in the point where like you had 20, right? And you were like, I don't know if this is actually going to perform. Like, did you just stick with it and say, like, you know what? As long as I keep taking action right now, I can't fully control the outcome, but I'm gonna put forth my best foot.
Yeah, my belief was just that like if I create the content that I had planned, it's like I
Mm.
knew that I was brand introductions. It's like if I do that, if I make enough social media posts and I like use Sweat Pals, like in the way that it's supposed to, I suppose, and like just advertise the event properly, then it should work. And if it doesn't, then I was like, I'll figure it out when that happens. But like, let's just try out the thing that I need to do. But it's also reaching out to like my sponsors too, of like Eastside Paddle Club. Can you send a newsletter like out? Can you make a mention in the Slack group? But I guess when I looked at that content, I looked at a brand like Ghost, I looked at Selkirk and all these other brands. It's like, okay, is there an opportunity to collaborate on the content, like the reel? So if I do that, that should bring a lot of exposure. You use certain hashtags like the geolocation hashtags, like that should help too with targeting your audience. Um, and also just running it on all social media platforms and channels. So like I directed everything to Austin, Texas for all that content. It was like LinkedIn, I put on YouTube, I put on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and then I did eventually run like targeted ads, like paid ads,
Mm.
which I'd really done before. So that was like interesting. But that was cool because shit works. Like I remember, yeah, this is crazy
I
because I
was
was like,
I was gonna ask you, what do you think the difference maker was? Because if anything, it seemed like it exceeded your expectations.
yeah, like I have the attendee tracking. So it was initially at like on October 8th. So the event was on October 19th. On October 8th, it was 37 people. Eastside Paddle Clubs posted on their Slack. I boosted the post on Instagram. I boosted on Facebook. And by 1 p.m. that day, it went to 47. But then by the next day, it was at 97. On the 10th, it was at 158. On the 12th, is at 229. Um, so, yeah, I think the ads finally stopped running somewhere during the week of the event. Um, so, like, yeah, it's just making sure, and I had never done that before, so it's like I did have to ask Doug from Bread and Butter. It's like, hey, do you know how this like this specific thing works? He gave me like some advice. Um,
Yeah.
so like targeting is really important, and like understanding ads. Would it have been better if I hired someone for it? Maybe. I was like, I just figure it out by myself. But um, yeah, I don't know. Like failure is never really an option. It's definitely like something that comes to mind,
Yeah.
but it's like I just know it's like not an option to a degree. Like it, or I guess that's a lie. It is always an option. It's just not a choice. Like failure is a choice, but it's like oh, failure will always be an option, but is it like a choice? So yeah, I
And I
just looked
agree.
at it like okay,
Yeah. And I could not agree with that more, because I have no doubt that this if this event did not go how you planned, you would have done another one and learned from it, right? So let's say, like in this case scenario, you did learn to run the ads in a short period of time and they worked successfully. Now you took notes on how they work successfully for the next time. But let's say that that pattern didn't work out. Um, right? You would have done the same iteration over again. You would have wrote down what you learned and went back for a second time, did the whole thing over again with now the new knowledge that you've gained from the first time around, right?
yeah,
And
yeah, it's tough. Yeah,
and that cycle happens over and over again, regardless. So we talk about that all the time. It's literally like you prepare for something to the best of your ability. The outcome is going to happen regardless of if it's quote unquote positive or negative, right? The outcome is going to happen, and then you're going to gain new knowledge from the outcome regardless. And if that iteration keeps happening over and over again over a certain period of time, it's inevitable that you're going to get to wherever you want to be or successful at whatever you want to do. Period.
yeah, yeah,
So I'm going to give you our last two closing questions. Is that okay with you?
yeah. Go for it.
So the first one we talked about a little bit already, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. What is your greatest fear?
Just like not living life to the full potential. Um, like there's like that, oh man, there's like a few. I think like being homeless is always gonna like, I don't know why that's a fear, but
Hmm.
it's like terrifying for me. You see it all around, like Austin, of course, all over the world, but
Yeah.
just the idea of like, I guess, no longer having the things that you have. Like, you can't take these things for granted. Like, I live in a house. It's like an amazing thing. I have nice clothes. I get to fucking be on a podcast right now. Like, that's insane. On like a Tuesday afternoon while most people are probably like stuck in meetings and stuff. But I think most of it is just like the potential. Like, not fulfilling whatever your own potential is. And what that is remains to be determined by whoever the person is and whatever life you want to live. But for
Mm.
me, like making sure that, not making sure, but to me, I do like to exhaust myself physically and mentally. Obviously, it's not like that's another thing that's not great because I don't always show up for other people in the way that I probably should, but like I'm just like addicted to like physical exhaustion and like working out. I just like love the feeling. I love how it clears my mind. And then like mental exhaustion of just like whether that's fulfilling every creative desire that I have or working really, really hard. It's something about the feeling of just like chasing this thing and then being able to accomplish it and then moving on to the next thing, which is kind of like the story of entrepreneurship to a degree, but it's just always working on new projects, which is like I find really, really fun and fulfilling. Um, and I get it. Some people are going to be like, that's probably not a healthy way to live, but I don't know, like what is a healthy way to live? Like I feel pretty good. I feel pretty fulfilled. It's just probably not the direction that some people want to live, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, everybody's cup is going to be filled slightly differently by different energies, different things, right? So, unique to you, if what you're doing is filling your cup, like honestly, bluntly, fuck everything else, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so I'm gonna put a question in between here. First, I'm just gonna say, is there anything that you feel like we haven't talked about today that you feel is like important sharing regards to
Um,
entrepreneurs or athletes?
let's see. Yeah, I think you asked the question of like, we're eager to explore your insights and advice you have for entrepreneurs and athletes.
Yeah.
It's something that is so overlooked in this industry, and I've heard it in other ones, so it must be pretty common, is
Mm.
if you want to establish a relationship with someone, provide value first. This was a very key principle in UX design. It was like if you want someone to click or you're going to ask people for their information when they open an app, you have to provide value for them before even asking. Like, how often do you just hate opening an app for the first time or like going onto a website and they immediately ask you for your name, your email, and your phone number? You're like, what the fuck? Why should I give this to you if you've given me nothing yet? And
Totally.
that rings true to relationships too. I think like you do have to provide some value, and it doesn't have to be like in this transactional sense, but come with something so that it at least piques someone's interest. Another thing is like going back to my tip of collaborating with someone. Don't ask people, hey, I would love to collaborate. It's putting kind of coming up with an idea on them, and if you're going to do that, you either have to be paying a lot of money and have experience with people in relationships like this, or be someone very well known where that works. Um, Otherwise, just like come up with an idea or at least a box that has like parameters to work within.
I
Yeah.
think I think that is tremendous closing advice for any entrepreneur or athlete. If I'm being honest with you, the reason I'm saying that is because even in pickleball, it is how do you go about finding new partnerships? Like that is a struggle for everybody. And if you are offering them some sort of value in order for them to even want to have a conversation with you or play with you in some manner, like that may open that door or crack it open a little bit just to give you an opportunity to at least show the skills that you have, right?
Yeah.
And I think in business it pays tenfold. I always go back to Hermosi's reference of like basically give them so much value they feel silly saying no. And I will tell
Yeah.
you that for me, doing that over and over again has paid dividends. Usually you have a 5 to 10x return on that, right? And that's how I've honestly ran into my greatest opportunities on the podcast outside of it in pickleball. It's just like offer an extraneous amount of value early. And I'm telling you, if you can be patient, it's going to pay you 5, 10x in the long run.
Yeah.
All right, Brian. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. There is a lot of valuable insights that I didn't even anticipate being on here, especially from a creator standpoint. I don't think that's talked about enough, and even how people can go about being involved in the space. So I thank you so much for being with us on the podcast today, and I hope we can get you back for a second time because I have other stuff that I would love to ask you about. If they want to find you and kind of like join you on this pickleball documenting journey today via Building Pickleball, where can they really find you right now?
Yeah, youtube.com/ at Building Pickleball or Instagram at Building Pickleball. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I've never done a 2 hour podcast, so this was like super cool. It's definitely an engaging conversation. If you ever want to do a follow up, hopefully it's like maybe like sometime next year where maybe
Yeah.
things have shifted where you've grown and I've grown and we have different things to talk about. Dude, absolutely open to it.